Hello everyone and welcome to the Bruno Galan talk show. If you like this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel to not miss any future episodes. I also want to mention I have a Patreon page in the description down below for those who are interested in further supporting it. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Bruno Galan talk show. I'm very excited today to have with me Peter Watts, sci-fi author, but a lot more. I'll let him explain that, but I want to say that he's the writer of a book that actually changed my life. This is no hyperbole, Blindsight. So hello Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm glad I changed your life. I hope it was for the better.
Yes.
I'd hate to be on the receiving end of a lawsuit about degradation of quality of life or something.
Well, in a way, your book is very depressing. I could maybe go for that, but it was actually a very positive change. Okay, I'm gonna geek out a little bit, but first I feel like we should kind of introduce people to who you are. And want to tell us a little bit about your background, because you didn't start as an author, right?
Yeah, no, I was. My formal background is in marine biology. I got a few degrees in that. Basically the goal was to just stay in grad school until I broke through to become a best-selling science fiction author, and that didn't happen. And then I ran out of degrees. So I ended up kind of staying in the field until basically I left it in a huff over politics. I was working for a consortium that was trying to explore why marine mammal populations had crashed in the North Pacific. And one of the interesting correlations was that the populations had started crashing when the U.S. commercial fishing industry moved into that area and started hoovering up all the fish. And another interesting correlate was that marine mammals that didn't eat fish, things that ate plankton, for example, seemed to be doing just fine. So it seemed that the idea of competition with commercial fishing interests was something worth following. But as it turned out, 90% of our funding was coming from the U.S. commercial fishing industry and the various banks that supported them. So I basically got, I stuck with it as long as I could. But eventually the political bullshit got to me, so I quit in a huff. And at that point, I figured, I've been trying to write science fiction since I was like a wee tyke of 8 or 9 years old. I've got a few months of unemployment insurance coming in. I might as well give it a shot. So I did, and here I am.
I love it. And now that you have explained a little bit of your background, I'm gonna geek out a bit. The way I came into your book, Blindsight, is embarrassing. Given how smart it is, I'm not trying to be like, "Oh, you're so amazing," but
go ahead. Tell me I'm amazing.
Cool.
That never gets old.
Very well. But I don't invite people to be in an echo chamber, is what I mean. That said, I really think it's a smart book. And the way I came into it is kind of embarrassing because I was sold on there's a vampire in space, and that was the B movie type of approach. I was like, I'm on board for that. It got me curious enough to read a little bit more about it, and then I kind of saw your take on vampires, and I really liked it. I picked up the book, and then it was about a lot more than that even. So even we can go to about your take on vampires in a moment, but just to get that story of mine out of the way that I wanted to tell you. Many, many years ago, I was a security guard, and I was working in a museum at night. So I was basically by myself, just doing the rounds in the museum, and then like being by myself reading your book. And we had this gigantic set of keys, right? And like different doors had different keys, and then some of them had the key upside down because of course it did. And then some of them you could turn left or right, and other ones you had to turn a certain way. And now I'm going to butcher, I'm sure I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but your book kind of goes into how self-awareness, or I don't know if you call that sentience, it's been a long time since I read it, how it actually occupies a lot of the brain. Like it's not the same as intelligence itself. So it kind of dwells into that, which left me thinking. And then I'm like, okay, so basically a part of us that's aware is kind of like this idiot part of the brain getting information from the other part of the brain, but kind of filtered. And I remembered stories about people who are like having like sleepwalking nightmares, or like they get up from the bed, they rip off the blinds from their windows, and then in their sleepwalking state, they put up the blinds again way faster than they ever could when they're awake. And it makes me think of when we type in a password without thinking, but if we stop to think about it, we suddenly don't remember a password, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So what I started doing with those keys is that I still struggle to explain it to people, but I stopped thinking about it. What it is, I stopped thinking about which keys were the right ones, and I would just kind of like space out, grab the set of keys, and every single time I would grab the right key, like of a huge set, the right key, I would put it in the right direction and turn it the right way. There was a part of my brain that already knew all this shit. I was just so busy thinking about it that it was kind of blocking that information. And that kind of blew my mind. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But so I kind of still do that sometimes. I kind of, it's like I learned to get out of the way of what my brain is trying to tell me. And, you know, I think that's instinct. You know, like a lot of people are better at reading body language than they think they are. You know, like they notice things. You know how sometimes you learn something about someone and suddenly you start having very specific memories of that person that were hints about that. And you kind of like didn't realize in the moment, but then you're like, oh yeah, they flinched that one time that I said this. Why was that? Or, you know, there's parts of the brain that are shouting at you, but you're too busy being aware of yourself to kind of assimilate it. And even in like, you know, before the pandemic, I would train martial arts a lot. Hope to go back soon. But as a hyperactive, I also notice for me, it's kind of relaxing to do sparring because in that state, it's like I'm calmer. I can be focused on this, on the matter at hand. I kind of get out of my own way, you know, like I'm dealing with someone trying to get to me, striking or grappling or whatever, and I just am able to focus on the matter at hand in a way that I can't with a lot of stuff as a hyperactive. So it was just fascinating to me how this book of yours has a really cool, creepy vampire, has really cool sci-fi concepts, and it asks you to be engaged and read because it's not going to hold you by the hand when it throws the world at you. It's not like it does a lot of exposition. You have to kind of like keep up with it. But at the same time, it kind of gave me this tool that I still use to this day, getting out of the way of my own mind.
Well, it turns out, I mean, I've just discovered this over the past few years. There's a whole school of thought now that talks about consciousness itself as being not the default state. It's the brain aspires to minimizing energy expenditure, and consciousness is really expensive metabolically. So the point of the brain is to minimize the error between what it thinks is going to happen and what actually ends up turning out to happen. So the point of the brain is to minimize error correction. When the prediction is accurate, you don't need to be conscious. When the knowledge has been internalized, when you're working on your martial arts moves, you are conscious because the universe is surprising you. You're not familiar with the stuff. Once you become familiar with it, once the information has been internalized, thinking about it consciously is the worst thing you can do. I obviously don't have to tell you this. Another example would be gymnasts, any kind of athlete, concert pianists. You know, the moment a concert pianist start thinking about what their fingers are doing in the middle of a performance, it totally destroyed the performance. So, according to this school of thought, consciousness is a function of error, prediction error. When the universe surprises the brain, when the universe doesn't tell the brain what the brain is expecting to experience, then you become consciously aware and you have to reconcile that difference. But by the same token, that means that the brain is aspiring to become a zombie because it wants to minimize. The brain ultimately wants to perfectly predict its environment. And the less error there is between prediction and reality, the less consciousness is required. So the optimum state for a brain is to be completely unconsciously aware of what it's doing and let all the heavy lifting happen below the threshold of conscious awareness.
Which I think you brought up in Equipraxia, right? The sequel to Blindsight.
Which
I think that's where you explored a bit more.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I did not encounter this error reduction theory until years after I'd written Equipraxia.
Oh, okay.
The cool thing about both Blindsight and Equipraxia is that I don't know jack shit about neurology. My PhD is in the biophysical ecology of harbor seals. So what basically kind of happened, I think, with that sequence of stories is that I just, for the sake of telling a good story and wanting a good punchline, I just basically blindly threw a dart over my shoulder and happened to hit a bullseye.
Okay.
I was really quite lucky in that sense. And it was only subsequent to the publication of Blindsight that I started encountering papers that said, hey, you know, consciousness may not actually be adaptive for anything. Consciousness may be a bad thing.
Interesting.
I mean, I couldn't think of what consciousness was good for while I was writing the story. So I thought, hey, this would be a really good punch in the gut for a potboiler science fiction novel, right? This is like, what if the thing that exalts us and that that we value most about ourselves turns out to be actually not that great and possibly a dead end evolutionarily? I thought that was just a really good punchline for a downbeat science fiction novel. So I played with it, but I didn't expect it to. I expected that like 2 weeks after I published Blindsight, some actual neurologist would write me up and say, "You ignorant doofus, you know, this is what consciousness is for, and this is why we'll always be conscious, and this is why consciousness is great." But that didn't happen. People, like neurologists, started putting copies of Blindsight in their labs, and it started getting taught in undergraduate neurology courses and so on. So and again, I got no formal background in that kind of science at all. I'm strictly a marine biologist, and even that expertise is like 25 years out of date now.
Yeah, that's really funny, actually. Although for me, my answer to what's it for is I like having it. I like being self-aware. Well, maybe I like it because that's how I'm wired, but nevertheless, I like it. So that's my only reason.
You have totally got the secret. Like this is what I have to tell people who come out of Blindsight being bummed out.
Yeah, that was my initial reaction.
It's like they're taking the perspective of the wrong part of the system, right?
Yeah.
Asking, you know, if I'm right, and I'm not saying I am. This is just kind of a guess that seems to have developed more legs than it probably should have. But if I'm right, consciousness is a kind of software parasite. And nobody ever asks, what good does the tapeworm do the host? What good is anthrax, right? Like nobody asks how a parasite benefits the host, because to do that is to completely miss the point of what a parasite is. So when people think that Blindsight is downbeat, they think that they're the host.
We're the parasite.
We're the parasite.
Yeah, we're the dumb part that has the feelings.
No parasite in the long history of parasites has ever said, you know, this is a nice warm host, but he'd be better off without me. So I think I'm going to flush myself out of his anus and leave him.
That is so funny.
Nobody does that, right? So we should be happy. We are successful parasites, right? We are not the system. We are the thing parasitizing the system. And of course, we enjoy being alive. It's great being alive.
Of course. But that was what it came like. It kind of got me thinking about things, and I was like, okay, so am I just this dumb piece of meat, because I don't believe in religion, so am I just this dumb piece of meat, and like all the things that I think make me intelligent, where I am intelligent, are just like other parts of the brain shouting at me, and they actually know so much more, but this is the only part of it that gets through the noise, and then I was like, well, it doesn't matter, actually. It doesn't matter, because in practice it's the same. Like, as someone who doesn't believe in a soul or anything like that, like it doesn't bother me that my love for my wife is chemically induced. Like it's kind of like this dismissive thing that people do, like, oh, love doesn't matter because it's all the brain just emitting chemicals. I'm like, okay, you explained it, but I still like the feeling. The feeling's still amazing. It still does everything that people say love does. Explaining something doesn't dismiss it. You just explain how it works. That's all you did. Like it's kind of like they kind of, cynics kind of go like, oh, love, and I don't know where you stand on this, so I might argue with you, or you might agree, or you might have a different take, but cynics kind of like to dismiss love, for example, when they come with the fact that, oh, it's just like the brain acting weird. So what? So what's the difference between, you explain, like when you explain attraction, pheromones and all that, okay, you explain love at first sight, like things like that. When people talk about love at first sight, well, those two human beings were really compatible, and they like the smell of each other and how they looked. So what? You just explain it scientifically. It doesn't dismiss it. So for 5 minutes, I was depressed, so to speak. But then I kind of, I'm very headstrong. I like to see things my way. Not that I don't assimilate other people's opinions or that I'm unable to change my opinions. But what I mean is that it takes a lot to make me feel dismay, even while I can absorb new knowledge. So I just,
I feel dismay all the time. It's kind of hard to look around at the world and feel
It comes through to
dismay.
your in your writing, yes.
But I agree with you in terms of the reductionist approach to the human experience. I mean, I agree with this. I mean, you have to agree with the cynics. It does all just come down to chemicals, but so does everything, right?
Exactly.
In a way, it's freeing. There's no two-digit IQ old man in the sky looking down, sending you to hell if you masturbate. If there is
He's very
a
kinky.
set of values to be gleaned from this meaningless existence, you get to build them yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's I mean, if anything, it kind of increases the wonder to me, because you're not invoking pixie dust or magical elves or God. You're saying
Comes from within.
this is a particular molecule with a little side chain that sort of fits into this, like vision literally is a very small ping pong ball hitting a surface on your eye and a spring on the back of that eye mechanically generating an impulse that goes up to your brain. You can break all this stuff down into incredibly reductionist terms, and yet somehow that manifests as consciousness, as a conscious experience. Tinker Toy interacting with other pieces of Tinker Toy wake up. And the fact that we can reduce it to chemicals, and the bumping of those chemicals produces this kind of experience, I think is even more miraculous.
Yeah, statistically
Than
at least.
saying, I mean, it blows my mind that that ions and electrical, little electrical signals jumping across pieces of meat can manifest the kind of things they do. I am, it's like watching somebody build the Taj Mahal out of toothpicks. You look at the toothpicks and they're just fucking toothpicks. But look at the edifice it created. It's amazing. It's miraculous. In a way, the more we understand how unmiraculous something it is, the more miraculous it seems.
If you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
We're very biased beings, but I think your approach to how you decide to look at something matters. I think it really matters because, the same people dismissing, like my example of like what love is, and other people being, okay, you explain, but still the feeling, like they're looking at the same information. They're looking at the exact same information. It's just how they decide to feel about it, I guess.
I think to some extent there is an allure in ignorance. You need a mystery. You need to be able to look at the universe and say, "Ooh, it's so mysterious." And there is I think a school of thought that figures that once you can explain a mechanism, once the mystery is gone, so is the wonder. But that's a wonder. That's a wonder based on ignorance. It's like, I wonder how that works, but don't tell me, because then it won't be wonderful anymore.
I'm going to be annoying with this comparison, and I'm sorry about it, but it's, that makes a lot of sense to me when I think of martial arts, because with mixed martial arts, I mean, for someone like me, I'm very interested. I want to know what works, and I think there's still a lot of what people like about those old school martial arts stories of duels, or this guy fought this other one for honor and all that. Like, you can still find it in modern MMA. It's just that it's not like this polished legend. It's the reality of it. Like, you think back in the day, two martial artists, and now there's like this legend of their duel in the fields and for honor and all that. Do you think that it looked like, how polished do you think it looked when it actually happened? The guys were probably insulting each other. It probably wasn't like, I mean, it depends on the culture, of course, but I think when we see in MMA, like a lot of people, it kind of removes the shine and the legend. So in martial arts, you still have a lot of people who refuse to look at MMA, which is the most, like, by the scientific method, it's what works in fighting. Like, you cannot get more close to that. And no, like, including hitting someone in the balls and biting is not going to change the fact that these people do that all the time and are trained. So do you think that, some people are like, yeah, but they don't know how to deal with someone poking in their eyes? Like, dude, it doesn't change anything. Actually, it happened recently, but I digress. Like, where the chokes still work.
I'm not familiar with the culture. I mean, wouldn't MMA just sort of be a logical progression? Doesn't everything evolve over time?
Yes. So, okay, I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm going to address what you said first, and then I'm going to get to the point I was making. What happened with MMA is it started as which style works best. And then, of course, a lot of stuff that didn't work it's the scientific method, but in a brutal way. What didn't work, people stopped doing that shit in the cage because it didn't work. They don't want to get their ass beat. I'm sorry if I'm swearing. But so then what happens?
I care.
So what happens is, you know what? This Kung Fu move doesn't work, but this Muay Thai move sure does. I'm going to use that. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu sure works. And then some people realize, oh, you know what? Wrestling, which was considered almost like a sport by most people, not a fighting, or actually allows me to decide if the fight's going to be standing or on the ground. And if the guy in front of me strikes better, I'm going to take it to the ground. If the guy is better on the ground than me, I'm going to keep it standing. He's not going to take me down. So, like, over time, it evolved, and it's still evolving because you started with specialists, and now you have people who do a little bit of everything. But then you also, so the thing about fighting that's interesting as well is that you don't have a single, I mean, sometimes you have the rare cases of this one guy who beats everyone, and those are amazing examples of skill. But very often we call it MMA math. It's not because this guy beat this other guy and they saw that the other one would beat. It's kind of like because styles make fights. An element of someone's fighting style might make you defeat this guy, but the guy he defeated might defeat you.
Because basically describing rock, paper, scissors.
Yes, exactly.
With MMA.
Exactly. So it's kind of like at first, everyone who came to play in MMA could only do one of the three: rock, scissors, or paper. And then eventually they learn, oh, I can actually do more than just one. I can actually choose between the three. And then there you go. So if you want to put it in that way, you have the striking when you're standing, you have the wrestling, which allows you to decide if you're going to take it down or stand up. And then you have the ground game. You know, so you have those three elements, and rock, scissor, papers. Anyway, so you were talking about ignorance. And what's interesting is that even, look, I was a teenager watching UFC 1 on my VHS. So we're like 30 years after it started or something. And this is like in North America, because in Japan, they're already doing that before. And people still want to believe in things that don't make sense. Like no touch, chi. People are going to like, you know, the old master just does this or touches someone here, and the guy falls on the ground unconscious, and they still want to believe those things. They don't want to let it go. They still want to believe that Bruce Lee, an actor who even in camera you can see is grappling not that great, and he's not that big, he would be the greatest fighter ever if you would put him against, I don't know, Francis Ngannou, the heavyweight champion of the world in UFC right now, who's like a massive human being who has to cut weight to make it to heavyweight. But they will still tell you that Bruce Lee would beat any of those guys, which makes no sense. And so a lot of people resent MMA for showing reality. They resent it. They don't want to, like, they deny it. And
well, maybe really part of the problem is a difference over what martial arts is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be kind of a balletic dance? Is it supposed to be a form of athletic competition with rules and formality and specific choreography? Or is it supposed to be a way to kick the shit out of somebody if you get caught in a back alley somewhere? The sense I get, again, no familiarity with the culture.
And I feel like I'm imposing my hobby on this conversation, but
you guys seem to be more in the camp of what works best to help you get out of a tight spot. Whereas the other guys might be more in terms of like they might be more into like yoga or something, right? It's more of an athletic,
which is fine,
discipline kind of thing, as opposed to a knockdown, drag out, self-defense kind of thing.
Yeah, it depends, because MMA has evolved into a sport which comes with a lot of baggage in that sense, and I'm for it, because at the end of the day, like, no, I don't want to watch two people in an alley with no rules and there's this broken bottle that this guy can also pick up and the other one can bite the other one in testicles. I don't want to see that. So I'm okay with it being a sport. I'm
not going to get that image out of my mind for the rest of my life. I hope you're biting somebody in the testicles.
Yeah.
Thank you so fucking much, Bruno.
Well, this is actually that happened in a comedy with James Franco and Bryan Cranston.
Really?
So yeah, yeah,
What was
like
the
James
movie?
Franco. I don't remember. Like Bryan Cranston's like the father-in-law, and James Franco's like doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And at some point, he does a triangle, and a triangle is basically when you wrap your legs around someone's neck and armpit. And if you do it right, they cannot really bite you in the balls because their neck is like this. So how are they going to bite anything if the leg is under the chin? But
Right.
for the sake of the comedy, Bryan Cranston like bites him in the balls, and it's really funny because we're very intellectual and we find that kind of stuff funny. Um, but MMA is a sport in the sense that, let's say, like you have 5-minute rounds, and just to answer a question, I think we should move away from it because I kind of imposed in a conversation by accident. But let's say someone works really hard at getting someone else on the ground, and you have a 5-minute round. You finally got him on the ground. The round ends. You both stand up. Now, maybe the guy who took the first one to the ground in a real fight where it didn't stop now would be on top position, and now he gets to have some fun. But now he could put all his energy, bringing this other guy down. The round ends. They start round two, and now the guy's exhausted from having brought the other one down. And suddenly, the guy who in a real fight that wasn't stopped would have lost now gets his second win. He didn't expend all that energy taking someone else down, and now he starts using the other one as a punching bag. So this is an example. I'm not saying it's how it always goes down, of course.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting example.
And again, the brain and self-belief is very important in any sport. But like someone like Khabib, who is like one of the greatest of all time, his whole thing is taking you down and just messing you from there. And one of the things that's interesting about him is he would just keep trying to take you down. It's not like he was like it always worked on from the first time he tried it. He just kept trying. He just was never phased if you stuff his first takedown because he was going to do it again and again and again, and eventually you were going to go down. And once you went down, it wasn't good for you. So anyway, but then again, if you talk about like street fights and stuff like that, how long do you want to keep someone on the ground if he has buddies around? So maybe what works in a 1-against-1 fight is not what works when the guy has buddies around him.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So but
is there? I guess the question I'm asking is, what is the balance in MMA?
Okay,
between
it's true.
sport and between actual self-defense.
Well, here's where I have an issue: is if someone tells me, you know what, I do this style of kung fu because it's beautiful to look at, it's a cultural thing. That's amazing. I will never bash someone for saying I do this because I find it fun. I do this because it's beautiful. I do this because I want to keep this cultural aspect alive. Those are very valid, legitimate reasons. I love art. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. I have this like meathead jock aspect to myself, but I'm also very much a geek. And so I will always appreciate someone telling me the value that this has is the beauty that it has. And that's a perfectly valid answer for me. Like there's a lot of styles of kung fu that I would never tell someone to practice that to defend themselves, but they're beautiful to look at. And I'm just using kung fu as an example. And kung fu has many styles. I'm not saying that if someone's watching and they do. There's a lot of styles of kung fu that also work. So don't get on me with this. But however, there's people who do stuff that is objectively not gonna work, but they don't want to hear it. And what I mean, it's not gonna work. If you always practice this move that you know what the other guy is going to do, and you never actually put it to the test with the other guy trying to stop you from doing it or trying to do something else to you at the same time, you don't actually know how to use it. I don't care how often you've repeated it in the air or with someone who's doing the same repeated pattern that you decided upon at first. If you don't do sparring, if the other guy's not trying to choke you, you don't know if it's going to work or not. And it's not going to work, by the way, because under stress, the brain doesn't act the same. It does not. And it's gonna there's for example, there's this self-defense guy, and self-defense is not the same as combat sports. It has things in common, but it's not the same overall. And this Tony Blauer, who I've interviewed on my Bruno's MMA show, another channel, he uses the brain's flinch reaction, or I don't remember how he calls it, but when you're attacked, it's kind of like you flinch, and it doesn't matter how much training you have. It's not the same to be in front of another man in a ring or a cage and, okay, everyone ready, go. And now your brain is decided, okay, now we're doing this. It's not the same as you're walking, suddenly someone gets into your face all of a sudden. You might be surprised of how little training comes through when that happens. There's a lot of stories of people who are combat experts getting beat up in a bar just because someone came at them, shouted in their face. I'm giving an example, but there's other stories in that style, and they just froze because they're like, normally when they fight, it's like, okay, are you ready? Are you ready? Go, you know. And suddenly this drunk guy is shouting in his face, and he annoys the bottle in his hand, and the guy does this, and he gets hit in the head, and it's over. And so so self-defense has a lot to do also with how the brain reacts. Your true reactions as a human being, not what you think you would do, but what you're actually going to do.
Yeah.
And also just situational awareness and a lot of stuff like that. Not ignoring. I guess this is why my subconscious is making correlations with blindsight, but not ignoring what you've seen in the corner of your eye. That part of your brain is shouting at you to notice. And part of good self-defense is also not ignoring those things, not ignoring those little warnings that your brain picked up somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but anyway, but the ignorance is, I mean, there's different reasons for everyone, right? Some people like to feel like they're tough without actually having done the work to be tough. So that's another thing. They don't want to go through any uncomfortable training, but they want to tell themselves that they're actually tough because they did this. So there's different reasons for different people, of course. But ignorance, a lot of people like to be ignorant. We don't like to confront the possibility of having wasted time or of having told someone something that was wrong in the end. We struggle with that. We're prideful beings. It's, it's but if we can go back to your writing, because I've actually taken too much time as the host, you're the guest. I want to talk about, like, your Blindsight vampires actually came up in Joe Rogan's podcast recently, and the geek in me kind of got offended because the guest mentioned that they took the book, but only for its vampires, if I understood correctly, and it was going to be set in modern times, but that means it cannot be in continuity with your novels because vampires did not exist in modern times. They were brought back by science in the future. So
actually, it works. I mean, you're talking about Neil Blomkamp.
I think I don't remember his name.
He's the guy who did District 9.
Okay.
And he approached me early last year, I guess, and was a big fan of Blindsight, and wanted to do something with. He did not want to make a movie out of the novel, which is just as well because the novel's already been optioned for movies.
Okay.
He thought that it would probably do better as a limited series, right, for something like HBO or something, which I have to agree with. It's a pretty dense novel, but he loved the idea of the vampires. So he didn't want to do. And there were potential copyright issues, right? Because the guys who had optioned the movie
Blindsight
had presumably had rights on the biology that I had used. We ended up, fortunately, they forgot to renew the option at about the same time Neil was talking to me.
Oh,
so the rights fell out of their hands, and of course they wanted to get them back because they'd just forgotten. But we were in a position of power, so we could then renegotiate.
So you kept the vampires.
We could renegotiate the contract, carving out a little spot so that Neil could do his movie if he wanted. And his thing was not, it was not, it's not going to be, it wouldn't be explicitly canonical for reasons of avoiding, copyright overlap. But it would.
Someone wanted to put them together.
It would be consistent. He was thinking in terms of the way he described it was kind of a Sicario set maybe 5-10 years in the future, showing the origin of the technology that gave rise to the vampires.
So it's not modern. It's
not modern. I mean, it is. It's closer to modern times than it is to vampire, or than it is to Blindsight times. Okay. So in that sense, when I wrote Blindsight, I envisioned a vampire resurrection as a fairly recent technology, but that was never It was never explicitly stated in Blindsight.
Yeah, that's how I
started
took
doing
it too.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could, and the movie itself had we went talking back and forth about potential plots and storylines and stuff, and it had the potential to expand, be an arc, basically a story arc that would last decades, because of course vampires can hibernate.
Yes.
So it would have at least started in the very near future. And he was, I got quite excited about it. He got quite excited about it. he was a little, he got kind of skittish about the rights overlap, but that we got that cleared out. But by the time my new agent came up with an actual contract to develop this project, his window of vulnerability, like he basically wanted to write it last summer, and my agent didn't get around to cobbling together the contract until early October. So the window passed. And Neil has now gone on to other things. I don't know. I mean, he last I spoke to him, he's still really interested in doing it. He just doesn't have a window of opportunity now. I've been down this road before, you know. It's even if we had signed the deal and gone into business on it, it's, you know, that means that the chances of a movie actually making it into production are like 1 in 100 instead of 1 in 1,000. It's still better than most, and it's, you know, it's money in everybody's pocket, which is good.
Yeah, you
but
still get
it's always,
paid.
And at this point, we're sort of back to square one. I mean, I'm still happy to do it. He says he's still happy to do it if we can make the times work out. Maybe it'll happen this year. Maybe it'll happen next year. Maybe it'll never happen at all. But in any case, it was fun to meet the dude, and we spent a lot of time sort of jitsying, you know, between his home in Okanagan and the Okanagan and me here, because I was a big fan of District 9. And I thought Elysium was a fine movie too. So although I had some plot related issues with it, but it's still, I mean, to actually have the guy who makes those movies on your Zoom screen saying he likes your stuff, is enough to make you, you know, cream your sweatpants pretty much nonstop.
I'm such a typical nerd, because here I was nitpicking a little detail without having all of the facts. And then you also told me, oh, no, it's not going forward. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not going forward?
Well, that's just, it's on hold for the time being, right? I mean, he's a busy guy. He's not just doing work in movies. He's doing work in video games and so on as well. So, you know, I'm not going anywhere. The idea isn't going anywhere. The rights are available. So hopefully he'll find time in the future to do it again.
So your vampires, because we kind of skip that, and you know, I kind of have to, when this show, I kind of have to remember, like, people might just not know the stuff I do, or that you do, obviously, as the author. But how do you describe the vampires in your fictional world? I mean, in Blindsight and Necropraxia.
Okay, vampires in my world were essentially a distinct hominid subspecies that kind of branched off from the human baseline, and existed as a cannibalistic subspecies. Some people said that they weren't even, some anthropologists and evolutionary biologists would claim that they're not even a distinct species because they were capable of interbreeding. They didn't diverge genetically enough. So some people describe them as basically a series of just a bunch of mutants with a consistent set of deformities. But one of those deformities was an inability to synthesize a particular protein called a protocadhedron. And that's involved in certain aspects of central nervous system development. And so basically and it's also something that's can only be found in other primates. So because they lost the ability to synthesize this protein themselves, and because they could only get it by eating other primates, they became cannibalistic. And I mean, the basic origin story was I started, I mean, without going into the explicit embarrassing details of how I was forced to come up with vampire ideas on the fly back in like 2001 or whatever. I was just kind of curious to see if I could take what's probably the most ludicrous and stupid supernatural stereotype and come up, you know, hand wave semi-plausible explanation.
Yeah, like the crucifix is because they have seizures.
Is a perfect example, right? You have something that preys on human beings, so it has to be super smart. It has to be able to outthink us. So you've got something that's way smarter.
Because they're outnumbered.
Corpus callosum. Yeah. But part of its pattern matching, part of its visual pattern matching skills involved types of associations which ended up causing its extinction. because there are in the brain, there are visual receptors that respond to certain primitives. There are types of arrays in the back of your head on the visual cortex that fire only when they perceive horizontal lines, fire only when they perceive vertical lines. And this is the way we end up perceiving complex scenarios. We have different clumps of cells that specialize in different types of shapes and different types of orientations. And they all just fire when they see what they're programmed to fire. And then further up the stream, the brain integrates those into an overall image. So what I posited was that the receptors that fire in response to horizon lines and horizontal stimuli, and those that fire in response to vertical lines like tree trunks, ended up getting cross-wired. So that if both sets fired together simultaneously over a certain large range of visual arc, maybe 30 degrees of visual arc, you get the equivalent of a grand mal, I guess they call them tonic-clonic seizures these now. Anyhow, basically a seizure, an epileptic fit. And this didn't tend to get weeded out because vampires have very small populations. So there's something called genetic drift, where something that's genetically neutral doesn't necessarily get weeded out. It can become fixed in the population because the population's small. It doesn't take much for a neutral trait to sort of spread throughout a small population. And it was genetically neutral because there aren't that many intersecting right angles in nature. And so by the time we started building Euclidean geometry, by the time we started building houses with window frames that had sort of cross beams and so on in it, this trait had become fixed in the vampire neurotype. And so they started freaking out whenever they saw intersecting right angles. That had to be, they had to occupy a certain amount of it. And this is just my half-assed way of explaining why vampires feared crosses.
But I have a question though, and maybe it's censored in Blindsight and just missed it completely, or in Ecopraxia. But when in your canon, when did vampires, before being brought back by science, when were they extinct? When did they go extinct? Because it has to have been in a moment where humans had crucifixes for a legend to happen.
Yeah, there was. Yeah. I mean,
because my first read was almost like prehistory. Like, anyway, go ahead.
They basically. I'm going to say they basically died out around 10,000 years ago. Okay. Interestingly,
but then wait, 10,000 years. Then they didn't meet crucifixes.
Interestingly, there was maybe you're right. When did
Yes, that was bugged me because it sounded like they were so far back,
I did a whole talk, basically a scientific lecture presented by this Pfizer hack, this big pharma hack who had accidentally discovered the vampirism genotype by accidentally killing a bunch of autistic kids. It's up on YouTube if anybody.
That's a company.
I actually show timelines, when things sprouted out and when they went extinct. Yeah. Recent discoveries, I was really surprised. Just the past couple of weeks, I've discovered that Homo habilis was capable of speech, was capable of like really sophisticated tool use, was capable of probably even building things like rafts and long-term migration, like things that not even modern humans, things with like basically half the human brain size, were capable of far more complex communications than we originally gave them credit for.
Homo habilis, let's see. Oh, okay.
So these things, so there are things that are like, 200.
About 2.3 to 1.65 million years ago. Okay.
There are things that are like hundreds of thousands of years old that are were actually pretty sophisticated. I'm pretty sure they weren't building Euclidean stuff. They may have been sort of building huts, but yeah, no, you're right. It was one of those dawn of history things, and of course because human technology advanced at different rates in different parts of the world, there would be parts of the world, there would be certain types of human civilization where vampires dared not tread, but other parts where they're humans, we're still basically in the Stone Age.
Which would actually...
I played around with, one of the things I played around with was the idea, and I haven't played around with this canonically, it's not in any of the stories, but I always thought that Indian architecture, with the the
Yeah.
weird curves, the sort of the onion shape. I always kind of wondered if maybe there was some kind of maybe I could, write a little scientific note about how early Indian architecture that tended to shy
Influenced by
away from right
vampires.
angles may have had an adaptive significance in that sense. Perhaps there's like,
Yeah.
in the same way that there are bits of Neanderthal DNA in all of us, maybe there were little bits of vampire DNA in
Oh
the
my God!
Southern
Don't do
Asian
that because
populations.
I understand you're approaching this from a storytelling perspective, but this day and age, people will misinterpret anything. I don't think you should, because
Yeah, I know, but fuck it.
people are gonna be like, "Are you saying that these people are vampires?" Like.
Yeah, I've had the same fucking problem with. I've got people saying. I mean, it's that ship has already sailed, Bruno.
Mm,
I've got people
that's
saying that I'm anti-neurodiverse because I associate vampirism with autism, right? And if you actually go back and look at, or that I completely mischaracterize Siri Keaton as an autistic. He's not autistic at all. If you actually go back,
But he has half his brain is an AI or something. So
yeah, this is the thing.
yeah,
If
he's
you
not
actually
your
go
typical.
back and look at Blindsight, never
If you pay
at
attention
any
to the
point
story.
do I describe Siri Keaton as autistic.
Not only that,
So
by the
what they are
time
doing, what these people are doing, is they're howling in outrage at my misrepresentation of a demographic that does not actually exist in the real world.
Okay, I'm gonna say two things about it. First of all, you're right, because the moment where we meet him before his operation is super short in the story. What little we know of him as a kid doesn't give us enough to make any sort of diagnosis, nor do you claim one in the book. And then by the rest of the book, half his freaking brain is a machine.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, no, it doesn't apply to any real existing people. What's funny is that amongst my many geeky hobbies, and again, I'm gonna like freaking drag kicking and streaming one of my hobbies into this conversation somehow, which will either make the conversation different from your interviews or really, really annoying for people who are fans of yours. But I love tabletop role-playing games.
Oh yeah.
So like Dungeons and Dragons, and right now Dungeons and Dragons is going through its whole phase of being really careful what they present. So for example, it used to be that if you played an elf, your dexterity and your constitution was not the same as a human, because elves are not built the same. So they might be more graceful, faster, but also maybe not as sturdy as a human being, and stuff like that, right? Except these days, that's considered eugenics. So they have removed the ability score modifiers from elves. And I'm not done. So the thing is that when you look at a lion and a leopard, is it not okay of me to point out there are two different types of felines and they don't have the same physical characteristics or mental ones even? I would be very offended if a role-playing game gave me different statistics for a white man, an Asian man, a black man. I would be very offended with that. I wouldn't like that. But that's not what they do. It's different
supposing
species.
Supposing there was a characteristic for melanin content,
Well,
which actually gives you some kind of a protection
resistance
against
to
certain
sunlight.
types of radiation-based.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's true.
Right?
It's true. There you go. A
Black
pasty
people
white
would
person
have an advantage in that case.
Yes, a white person doesn't react the same to the sun. So you do. Again, like people don't like to hear this, but yeah, you can point to differences, right? Like I'm half Spanish. In Canada, I'm not the tallest guy. Okay, I as a half Spanish person would tell you I'm not the tallest guy around, because in Spain, on average, people are not as tall as in Canada. Okay,
Yeah.
so if I don't think I offended anyone, because I'm talking about white people. I'm talking about my own people. So whatever.
I wasn't aware of that. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons back in grad school a lot.
I'm shocked.
Had a big fan. Had a lot of fun with it, and
yeah.
Then kind of fell out. And I just recently, a friend of ours, every now and then hosts sort of before COVID kicked in anyway, hosted these one night campaigns, right?
Yeah.
And I was kind of amazed because all of a sudden it was like we had to come up with safe words.
Oh no! Oh my god! Trigger warning, dude! I wish,
because apparently it's now an issue where something that happens in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign might trigger you.
Yeah, no, that is a whole
And I found
that's the whole thing.
surprising and a little disturbing.
Trigger warnings are not good for you, by the way. It has been proven over and over by psychologists. Trigger warnings will make you identify with the trauma and will make you like internalize it and think of it as part of you. Trigger warnings do not help with trauma. That is proven by psychologists.
Neil Gaiman came out with a collection, I think, called Trigger Words. And he got shat on. He got shat on by the woke left because
he's anti-censorship.
Apparently the phrase trigger words is now a trigger word.
Yeah, but you know what? Okay, so there's this thing called the X card in role-playing games now. And if you bring up the X card, let's say there's something that bothers you in the game, and you bring up the X card, everyone has to stop, and the person bringing up the X card doesn't have to explain anything. We just skip the scene. What we're doing is storytelling. We're doing storytelling as a group, and then because you can't deal with what happens, like, and we're all adults here. Like, if I'm not an asshole. Like, if I'm running a game and someone says, "Bruno, I'm actually uncomfortable," I don't know. I'm gonna give an example that's not too tough to bring up. Let's say a friend of mine got mugged the other day, and for some reason, the scene we're describing in this D&D game happens to be very similar to what happened to him. He goes, "Bruno, do you mind taking a break? I'm actually, it's making, like, I'm uncomfortable. Like, what happened to me the other day is kind of reminding me of that." Of course, I'll take a break. Maybe I can change description a bit. Like, I normally never do rewinds on the story, but for something like that, like, okay, fine. But then this is us communicating as adults, but now it's kind of like you don't explain anything. And okay, you have to, but that's not how life works. If I'm at work and people are talking about something that makes me uncomfortable, I have two options. I can discuss it with them. Guys, can we please talk about something else? I'm actually uncomfortable with this. Well, three options. I can deal with it. I can ask them to change the subject, or I can walk away. And these are the mature ways in which you can deal with the world. Like you just communicate. Or if there's no consensus possible, there's no middle ground to be found, okay, I'm going to remove myself from the equation because I'm not comfortable with this. That's fine. That's also fine. But it's kind of like people have now this way to impose, and of course it sounds, because like they'll reframe it as, oh, you're asking people to explain their trauma. But it's like, look, if you don't even explain it, how do I know to avoid it next time anyway? Like, if I don't even know what exactly in the whole scene made you uncomfortable, how are we going to avoid it next time? And
yeah, my
there's more, by the way. Like there's so much more where
my
evil races are a no-no now.
I was raised by a mother who would always pull this card. It was always like, you can't say that. Why not? It's offensive. That's all you need to know. So I have ever since, before this stuff, when I was still a kid, I got very hypersensitive to the idea of somebody saying, you can't do this, you can't say this, not because it hurts anyone, not because I have to explain it, but because I find it offensive. That's all you have to know. Yeah. So I've bristled at that literally for like going on 50 years now. That said, I do understand. I have seen, back in the day when I played D&D more regularly, I've literally seen friendships break up over stuff that happened in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, where a character would do something to another character that actually made perfect sense from the point of your role playing, right? You're playing a different person than you actually are.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you prepared to. Some people, it doesn't mean you knowingly from the start wanted to betray this character, but sometimes the story just leads you there. Like, it's not always that you created a character to be an asshole. Sorry.
Yeah, and in any event, in the particular case I'm thinking about, this was actually reasonable. This was reason. You have somebody new comes to the group, right? Mm-hmm. And they're obviously hiding something, and you don't know what it is they're hiding. And what they're actually hiding is this deep trauma, sort of a deformity that they have that they're ashamed of, and which has caused them a lot of pain in the past. But they're not telling anyone about it. And so the other people become increasingly paranoid and increasingly suspicious. Have we taken a spy into our midst and so on? And so at one point, one of the characters basically forces the issue. Yeah. And this is all Oh my God, my cat just took a dump and it stinks. It's like, oh my God, we're talking war crimes here. Oh my God, that smells. Okay, I'm gonna power through this, and because you can't smell it, and I'm gonna prove I'm tough.
For a moment, I was wondering if that was part of the story you were telling.
No.
I was like,
I've got a
wait,
litter
I
box in the
missed the
closet
beat.
right here,
Okay.
right? So it's just.
I was like,
On
wait,
second
what
thought, this
happened
was
in
a
the
really
game?
bad place to set up. Anyway,
I was like, I missed something here.
yeah, no,
Okay.
we gotta stop feeding them duck. Anyway,
Yeah.
so it was actually a pretty good interactive story, right? It all made sense.
Mhm.
Everybody's
Mhm.
behaviors
Yeah.
were legitimate. Nobody
Mhm.
was actually being like, it wasn't like one of the characters arbitrarily deciding they were going to sexually assault another character, right? It wasn't, and it
Yeah, that
wasn't
would be
anything
weird.
that blatant. It
Yeah.
all made sense,
Mhm.
but a friendship broke up over it.
Okay. I can see that.
And
Yeah.
so but I at the same time I think that's kind of stupid. I mean,
It is. It is.
I was
When
friends
I
with
say
both
I can
I was
see
friends
that,
with
I
both
mean
people.
it rings
But
true about people, but I don't agree with
you
it.
can also see how easy it is to game something like that. I mean, if you realize that as a D&D character, if you've done something stupid, you've blown all your spells for the day, right?
Yeah.
And you really need a fireball, and you don't have a fireball anymore.
Yeah.
All you got to do is hold up the X card and reset, and you don't have to explain. And you reset to a point where you've still
Oh my
got your
God.
fireball thing. Right?
Dude,
I mean, I can see this kind of veto being so easily exploited and misused that it totally destroys. And basically, it's like hitting
oh
a
my God.
save button
But
on a
that
video game.
yeah, and that's the whole thing, and there's so many controversies now because I don't know. Okay, internationally speaking, I don't know if I'm left or centrist, but I know that for North America, I'm definitely a leftist in North American terms, at least. So, and but like what I find is that the younger left generation, I find them censorious, and I find them to have traits that used to be part of the conservative right in the 90s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Moral panics, censorious, unable to deal with certain subject matters at all. If you want to bring them up, you're evil. You shouldn't. Like not right now. Like for example, like there's words that are removed from like orcs or savage. Right now, you can no longer say orcs or savage because that was a word used by colonizers in regards to real people in history. And you have plenty of takes.
This is literally part of canon. They have removed
Yes, dude.
savagery from.
Oh my God, Peter. Look, I've actually. There's another person I collaborate with sometimes, James Desborough, and he's like this tabletop games writer and designer, and yeah, controversial because he talks about controversial stuff. Recently, there's been this whole thing where online he's been labeled alt-right. He's a left anarchist, and he's been labeled alt-right just because he thinks that the X card is dumb. And he actually points out scientific things like these things don't actually help people with trauma. He is actually clinically depressed, has almost committed suicide at some point. So by all standards, he's part of this minority we should listen to, except if it doesn't fit what that whole group is saying, you're no longer part of the minority that you should be listened to, even though you might be part of the group that they would normally hold high, right?
Where are you based? Where are you based in Canada?
Well, I live in Ottawa right now, which is very interesting to say at the present moment. I used to live. I live in Montreal for a very long time. Have you heard about the Lindsay Shepherd case? No. What happened there?
This is somebody who she was a grad student at, I think it was York, and she cited it was she was a TA in some particular kind of lab, and she played I think a 5-minute clip of a TVO interview with Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
On the subject of pronouns.
Okay.
And she was talking about how there are certain
and I want to mention real quick that you actually used non-binary pronouns in this book, The Freestone Revolution. So I want to start with that because I know
no, it's not a I mean,
I know the internet. So
If
go
it
ahead.
wasn't a
Sorry.
political statement on my part, it's like describing
Yeah.
some people as having green eyes. I mean, so
Exactly.
what?
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
adds to the flavor, and there's
See how
there,
paranoid I've become, Peter?
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But yeah, I've had people actually shit all over freeze frame revolution because it's too politically correct, because it uses these pronouns.
You know, that the thing that pisses me off is that these people exist, whether you believe in what they're saying or not. They exist. And my point is that, you know, when people complain about trans characters existing in a story as if that itself was a political statement, that is not a political statement. Like, these people exist. If you put them in a story,
Yeah,
in itself, unless you include a political statement as well, if you just have them in the story, it's not a political statement at all. Like, it's people that exist. Therefore, it makes sense that they appear in stories. Anyway.
here's the basic, I think the
Yeah,
basic
sorry, go ahead.
cause of all of this.
Mhm.
Putting the Lindsay Shepherd case aside for the moment, and
Which I
looking,
didn't let you finish, but
but that's okay, because this is actually a more fundamental issue.
okay.
I don't think in a lot of cases it really has anything to do with gender pronouns or transphobia or racism or whatever. What it has to do is fitting in with the tribe.
Yes.
Apparently, the term tribe is now considered verboten too in some quarters.
Whatever.
But we are a tribal species.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And there has been an enormous amount of research that shows that it doesn't really matter what is being said. All that matters is who is saying it. If it's somebody on your side that's saying it, you will tend to defend it.
Yeah.
And there have been so many cool studies that show that exactly the same thing can be said. And if it's said by a member of your tribe, you will defend it. And if it's said by a member of the opposing tribe, you derogate it. There was a really interesting study by Kahan et al., I think back in 2009, that showed that our ability to do basic math is compromised by ideology. They showed people data, which they said came from scientific studies. And the data required a modicum of statistical insight in that you had to realize that what you were looking at were percentages, not just absolute numbers.
Interesting.
So that the number of people that responded to a skin rash treatment here would be higher than that over here, but the sample size was much smaller there, so you had to factor that in, right? You needed that level of expertise to interpret the data. And what they found, and then they gave these data to people who were self-described right or left wing. And then they asked them to interpret the results of a study on skin cream, the effect of skin cream on a rash. And no big surprise, if these people had a certain amount of statistical smarts, they would get it right. They would interpret the data correctly. If they weren't very statistically savvy, if they didn't have advanced educations or whatever, they would tend to get it wrong. And then they provided a bunch of people with data on gun control. And they showed right-wing people, a bunch of right-wing people, evidence that showed that gun control did not work, that gun control actually increased crime. And what you found was amongst the statistically illiterate people, you got pretty much the same effect. But that amongst the statistically savvy people, they had absolutely no trouble interpreting the data correctly, that gun control did not work. And then they showed another bunch of right-wingers data that showed that gun control did work. And the statistically illiterate people, again, didn't really get it. The statistically savvy people also stopped getting it. Like they started making errors. Basically, their statistical literacy levels dropped to zero, not because they interpreted the data and rejected it. They weren't saying that this data is a hoax. They literally, cognitively, could not understand the data that showed them that gun control worked. And the trick, of course, the punchline is that it was exactly the same data. All they did was switch the headings on the columns.
That's amazing.
And the same thing happens with left-wingers.
Yeah.
Left-wingers were perfectly capable of interpreting statistical data saying that gun control worked. When you showed them identical data that showed them that gun control didn't work, they started making stupid mistakes. So I don't really think that people, I think on some level, people don't really care about gender pronouns. I think on some level, people don't care about, I mean, there's this huge um, backlash against the 90s comedy series Friends. Now, Friends was, because of its homophobic jokes and
Yeah.
so on, right?
Yeah. Product of its time for
Friends
sure.
was a stupid show. I never liked it when it was on. I thought it was shallow. I thought it was idiotic. I thought that the jokes were
I never got into it
dizzy.
either. Yeah.
It was an idiotic show,
Mm.
but it was of its time.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening now is that people want to belong. They have their tribe. And the way you get social, like one of the things I'm fond of saying is you don't make friends in Texas by going down and telling them that vaccines work and everybody should wear a fucking mask. You make friends in Texas by going down and ratting out your neighbor when she tries to get an abortion.
Yeah.
It's not a question of whether it's right or wrong. It's a question of how closely it hews to community standards. And so I think what's happened here is that we have these communities where all the low-hanging fruit has already been taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows racism is bad.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that transphobia is bad. Everybody knows that there are human rights. But as a result of that, the diversity of opinion, the curve, has narrowed. Yeah. So now you have to get closer and closer to the mean to find, like, all the low-hanging fruit is gone. So you no longer get any brownie points with your tribe by calling out racism. So you have to cut narrower and narrower. So now all of a sudden we're getting our brownie points by shitting on a show from the last century, which was a stupid show. But what do you expect them to do? Do you expect them to go back and digitally remaster all episodes of Friends to take out the homophobic jokes? And so I think that's why things are becoming extreme, not because, I mean, the proximate appearance is that people are becoming more intolerant and more stupid. Yeah. But I think what it really comes down to is that,
I mean, in practice,
we want to belong to our tribe.
There's
and it's harder and harder to do that. So we have to become more extreme in our expressions of tribal fidelity.
There's two other things. Us who are older understand that when we sought out older media, we understood we were watching something from a different time because we had to track down a VHS at the store, or we couldn't just watch on a streaming service. So when we tracked down something from another era, there was already this understanding that it wasn't from our time. Whereas now for people, Friends is as present as it was in the 90s because it's there, it's available. They see Johnny Cash in the Muppet Show or something, and there's the Confederate flag in the back. Like, what was Johnny Cash a white supremacist? So people don't look at that with this understanding of a different time.
Do you really think that's stupid? Do you really think that people go on a Netflix and they find a show from the 80s or the 90s and they don't internalize?
A lot of them are because they say wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter what time it was. So okay, fine. You don't want to take into account the world that someone was raised into, and you want to define them with that. Go ahead. Something else, and this is my own personal observation as someone who has in my life, when I was younger, especially, and before I had a family and all that, and when I saw something I did not agree with in how certain people treat others, I would step in. So, when you defend a woman from being attacked, you feel valuable after. You feel good about yourself. So, for example, if in the past, I've gotten into fights to defend other people. And I felt like I was a valuable member of society. I felt like I had worth. Even if in that moment I was broke, I was in between jobs and things were not going my way, I had found my value that one time. My hyperactivity, which makes me kind of focus for these kind of situations, they're not staying at a desk, but actually stepping in and doing something with my actions. I felt like in this modern society, my kind of way of being had value. So I felt good about myself. And it is an amazing feeling. Even though you were in this very ugly situation, you are on some, and this is complex, and I'm going to try to explain shortly, but on some level, you're happy this ugly thing happened because you get to feel good about yourself.
I get it,
so it's kind of weird. But now what I think is happening is it also takes guts to step in there and do something good, and where there's something for you to lose. For example, your own health, your own life. or your reputation in some cases, or whatever it is, like to actually step in there, do something that you'll feel good, but also there's a risk. And this is why it feels so good, because it's not something easy. But I think with social media, people have found an artificial way of having that feeling. I did something good. So let's say someone said something that was pretty harmless, but I don't know. Like, let's say someone says, "Oh, I don't understand pronouns," which is not even an attack on it. It's just admitting I'm not sure I
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
this. And someone goes, "Look at this transphobe piece of shit," and you, well, actually, you've acted like an evil person because you've attacked someone who didn't deserve it. But um, also, and the context is completely gone now. So I think these people are seeking to feel heroic. They're seeking to feel good about themselves. They have value in society. They're attacking the evil of society, but they do it in a way that's easy. There's so many people, like, look, I really agree with the feeling of I punch Nazis. If someone was, unless I'm grossly outnumbered or with my family and I don't want to start some crap, like if I see someone waving a Nazi flag, odds are I will want to punch them. And if I can get away with it legally, I very well might. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of people who write that, I don't believe that you would. I don't believe that you're. When I look at you, and I'm sorry to generalize, when I look at that person, and I don't believe that they would. They talk a lot of shit online, but I
Oh
don't think they
yeah.
would punch anyone. And and that's the thing that bothers me a lot is they get to feel like they're heroes, but
And
they're
it's
they're
more
not
than
doing
that.
anything heroic. And if anything, they're doing something villainous because they trash people's reputations completely over nothing.
You're
Like,
you're 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 right. I think it's not just that they're doing something that's easy. They're doing something that's public. There have been other studies that show that
yeah,
we are. I mean, there's a reason why
they
those
don't behave
people
like
that
that at the
sell
workplace.
roses on the street always target couples, right? Because you need an audience in order to be properly effective as a hustler. They've done
Yeah,
studies where people are given a choice of various types of volunteer work to do, right?
yeah.
And it's amazing. Everybody wants to work in a soup kitchen where
Mm,
everybody can see them working in a soup kitchen and
yeah,
being a good citizen, right?
yeah,
Nobody wants to go down into that ravine and clean up litter because
yeah,
there's no audience in the ravine.
yeah.
It's just a kind of
Exactly,
you know,
exactly. It's bullshit. It's
if you're
fake.
familiar with your scriptures, it's the whole thing where the Pharisees, ostentatiously drop their money into the
Oh
offering
yeah,
plate at the temple, right? They're
yeah,
they're just essentially they're doing it for show.
yeah. And
And
it's this safe way of feeling good about yourself. That's actually, like you,
but don't
to,
forget,
yeah.
the reason you're feeling good about yourself is not because of your own intrinsic morals. It's not like you're doing something, you're not saying everybody else hates what I'm doing, but I think this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to feel good about myself. The reason you feel good about yourself is because you get social kudos for it. You get pats on the back, you get likes, you get people
There's actually.
saying that you're an ally or whatever,
Yeah.
right? I
Oh, okay,
think
okay. You mean people online? Yeah, because I was
I
gonna
think it all
say,
comes down to just fitting
yeah,
in, trying to fit
because I was
in
gonna say,
with a tribe that
yeah,
in anthropological terms you needed to stay alive.
yeah. And but I will say that I learn a lot when you help people. I learn a lot about human nature in the sense that how in movies when someone helps someone else and whoever they helped is like, thank you so much, and they take the time to thank them, and they're just appreciative. Or the good old stereotype of like, oh, what, like the woman, like, oh, what a hero, come with me, like. In reality, when you step in to do something violent to another violent person, very often the person you help will also be scared of you, and that
Huh.
is, it's not a pretty sight. When you step in for violence, it is not a pretty sight. And the person who was avoiding it will not necessarily want to be close to either, because now you've also outed yourself as a dangerous person. You have chosen who to be dangerous to, and you have a set of morals of who you wouldn't do that to and who you would, but a lot of people are uncomfortable around that. And another,
That's a really interesting observation.
yeah, and so very often I've been avoided by the people I've helped just as much as the people who were attacking them. And it happened once that someone came to thank me, and it meant the world to me. It shook me that someone thanked me that one time. And I want to be clear. I didn't
How
like.
often do you do this? How often do you go out on the street
It's
and
been
beat up
years. It's been
evildoers?
years. Look, it's been years, and you know, it's kind of like it kind of happened like in movies in a way. You know, in movies how the hero gets to keep their hands clean, but the bad guy gets their upcomings anyway. Like the hero defeated bad guy, turns around, and then the bad guy grabs a knife, but he slips and falls off the ravine. The hero didn't kill him. You know,
Yeah,
his hands are
yeah.
clean. So it kind of happened the same way to me. Like at some point, like I was running after this guy. This guy was two bodybuilders were harassing women, and I was so out of shape back then. I can understand why they thought it was harmless. And they, you know, people who, and they were shirtless. People who think that lifting weights makes them dangerous. It helps, but that in itself does not make you dangerous. It certainly helps. Strength helps, but it's not this unique factor that's it. And you know, the guy tried to punch me. I blocked. I kicked him because I was drunk and wearing jeans. I wasn't able to kick him in the balls. I actually kicked him in the inner thigh. And but just for the fact that he knew that I could do this, he kind of like ran away from me. And I just let him go. But then what he did to compensate is he punched one of the girls. It was no, he kicked her. He did the same thing I did to him to the girl. So I started running after him. And then and I was shouting, "You attacked a woman," because since we're changing location, this is part of like if you want to think of self-defense and all that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we're changing locations.
Witnesses.
Oh, when I say I wanted everyone around to have the context, so I didn't think I was the bad guy because I understand I'm the guy running after him now. And also, just before that, just like, you might find this interesting regarding how the brain reacts. Confusion is so important. When I was having the argument with the first one, the taller, bigger one was circling around to attack me from behind. So what I did, I turned around and said, hey, don't cheat, one at a time. And I was, and it shouldn't have worked, but he was so confused by it that it worked. So you can hack the brain, kind of like the vampires do necropraxia. You can hack the brain in a way. It's called social skills or social manipulation. But anyway, so I'm running after a guy to give him like a good old beating, but nothing like, you know. But then he, running away from me, he ran into the traffic, and this sports car made him like hit him in at the leg level, because in a way, thankfully, being a sports car, it was very low. The guy jumped, like flew in the air. And it's kind of interesting how the brain works under adrenaline, because first of all, I was really out of shape at that moment, but I wasn't tired after running and shouting, and also everything was in slow motion. So I saw him flying in the air, and as he was flying in the air, I was already thinking, okay, this guy already had his beating now. I don't need to do anything more. I also need to get the fuck out of here. And then I turn around and I see this group of girls who are being harassed, like being like, "Yay!" So the sports car driver is driving, and suddenly a shirtless guy runs in front of his car, and he hits him. He flies, and on the corner of the street, there's like people cheering. And then when I turned back, they were already gone, but it was in front of the hospital. So I don't know if they went to the hospital or what. A friend of mine told me after when I told him the story that one time he was jogging, and he got barely bumped by a car. And at first, like under the adrenaline, like he just jogged home. And only after the fact was his body hurting a lot. So I imagine initially, but it really hit him in the leg, which is good, because if he's going to use his healthy body to harass people, then he doesn't deserve it. But why did I start talking about this? I forget now why I started telling the story.
We were talking about virtue signaling and doing good things in public.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah,
and how it gets.
Yeah, and I thought of the one time someone thanked me. That's when the group of girls came to thank me. And that was like the first time ever someone did.
Yeah.
But also, I think part of the reason is that one of those girls was actually, when I went to talk to the guys when they were harassing them, I was kind of like acting like very nonchalant, like, "Hey, what's going on? Well, where's your shirt?" Like I was kind of acting friendly, knowing that the guy was like an asshole. But I just wanted to antagonize him in a way that I didn't feel guilty. If something happened, I was just being friendly, so it's his fault. So, so you can also say that when I was younger, I was kind of looking for an excuse. That was part of that. But my moral code wouldn't allow me to like get into pointless fights. So if I saw a fight that was worthy, then there's my outlet. So I never did anything. Like it was always self-defense. I just went to talk to the guy. If he took it the wrong way and acted in a way that he shouldn't, that's his fault. And also, he was really dumb, because I was very calm. He's like, "Go back to your plushies." And I was like, "Hey, how do you know I have plushies at home? That's pretty good." And he kind of like showed me a little bit. I was like, "Okay." And the guy didn't understand that. He thought that because he shoved me a bit and I was still standing there, he thought that he had the upper hand, because he didn't understand the dynamics of actual violent people or actual violence. If someone is really calm in the face of potential violence, that tells you something about them. they're not shouting, they're not you know, like when two men are like shouting and shoving, and they don't really want to fight, they just want to pretend that they would.
Yeah.
Because if you want to do it, you go and do it. And he misinterpreted me not pushing him back or something as me being weak, but the reality is, if I had been weak, I would have walked away, you know. So anyway, again, like, you know, a lot of people want to feel like they're tough, as the same way like people online want to feel like they're good without doing anything actually good. People who do martial arts that don't really work want to feel like they're tough without doing something tough. Like same thing, like people who weightlift and think that in itself intrinsically makes them tough people. It doesn't. There's a mentality, there's knowledge of violence. And now I want to be clear, I'm a geek. I'm not a tough guy either, but there's levels to everything. Yeah, I keep saying violence as this very shorthand word, but it's always been self-defense for me. I want to be clear on that.
Violence definitely has its uses. There have been many times when I would have liked to inflict violence on people. I generally haven't. I don't think I've been in a fight since high school, but
I haven't been in one in years either. Actually, when I started training regularly, that's when I stopped being in fights, or I would find ways to resolve things. I got it out of my system, is the correlation. You know, like, but you know, like when I came back from a class super tired and in a subway, and like this old man is being bothered, I was like, I look around, no one else is gonna go, really, and I wasn't like, I didn't feel like doing it like I used to, but I went to, hey, I'll leave the man alone, and you know, the guy just left, just because the old man wasn't alone anymore. It was like, you know, in the past I might have been a bit more confrontational, you know what I mean? But anyway, but it kind of reminds me of your vampires, where humans like instinctively feel like there's a danger there, you know, like and I think there's like this people who actually understand these things. I can feel when someone around me has the potential to do something, and it's a thing, you know. Like what I like about your books is they speak as to the brain picks up things that are not superficial.
Well, I mean, we've spent, you know, we've been walking erect for what, somewhere between 3 and 4 million years, and certainly there was no shortage of intramammalian violence prior to that. I mean, yeah, the fact that we're talking today means that we are the end product of a series of ancestors that obviously were good at picking up on some kind of cues and reacting to them appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I don't think I'm doing anything especially unique with that, just recognizing that we're evolved organisms and that we're going to come with certain hard drive imperatives or hardwired imperatives. Somebody actually came up with the term hard character SF to describe what I do and what some other people do.
Interesting.
Which I think is a kind of a cool, like basically it's hard SF, and it does involve character development, but it's character development from an almost anthropological point of view, where you start off with the individual as, you know, a mammal, as opposed to, you know, somebody trying to deal with emotionally distant parents while they move across the country and come to terms with nature in the cold Pacific Northwest or something. It starts off more with, you know, you're a mammal and these are your reactions and this is what mammals do and this is how we cluster together in groups, and the dialogue kind of sits on top of that, but it's the brainstem that informs everything.
Peter, we have to end soon. It's been amazing. My life is calling me. I have stuff that I have to get to, but first of all, my geek question: what does Surasti look like? Because when I look up like fan art of the guy, I always get like different results. So what does Druka Surasti look like?
Yeah, have you been on the Rifters website fan art page?
Maybe, or maybe I remember looking it up.
Basically, I collect all that stuff together. Have you seen Daniel fuck, his last name starts with K, but it's Russian, so I keep forgetting it. There's a 5-minute short film out there based on Blindsight.
Yeah, I think I saw it. I did with the ship and everything, and
Yeah.
you see it
It's
floating.
basically it's basically scenes from Blindsight, but back to front, kind of Memento-like.
Yeah. So it looks like what we see in there, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
actually pretty close.
I'll rewatch it. Okay.
It's yeah. It's like they went back and forth with me. It took them 4 years to put this together around the edges of their lives. So they were constantly giving me concept art and asking me to comment on it.
Yeah.
So the Sarasti in the Blindsight short film does not sound. He does not sound anything like the Sarasti that I imagined, but he looks like the Sarasti I imagined. Maybe a little bit Mads Mikkelsen in there too.
Yeah, definitely. That's the vibe I got.
Yeah. That's sort of a Mads Mikkelsen guy in Daniel Kariskivo's shit. I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know I'm getting it wrong. And sort of a combination of that and Mads Mikkelsen, and you pretty much got it.
Another good question before we have to go, I have to ask you. In the beginning of Echopraxia, you kind of point out how the message at the end of Blindsight, which is wait. It was like, I am Keenan.
Imagine you are.
Imagine you are. So in the beginning of Echopraxia, when you point out it might have been actually the other intelligence putting itself in the head of Keenan.
Echopraxia, that's like 3/4 of the way through Echopraxia.
Oh, well, see, it's been a long time. So I just remember that I was thinking, is this something that you thought of after maybe it wasn't even the main character anymore at the end of the book? Or was it you just like pointing it out to us who missed it?
What it is between the books, I came up with an idea for a payoff for the third book. And
wait, did it come out and I missed it or not?
No, I'm still writing it. I've just started it.
Okay. You scared me.
And the question of what it is that's coming back that keeps imagining it's Siri Keaton is, I wanted to raise that issue. And the fact that what I'd essentially used is a literary tick, like a gimmick, to say, imagine you are this, imagine you are that, imagine you're the other thing. It was a good trick to use in Blindsight because this was the only way Siri can actually relate to things. He has to literally try and simulate what it's like because he's lost so much in the way of his emotive brain functions. Yeah. So it really worked there. And it also gives me the chance to sort of play around with past and present tense and stuff in interesting ways. So sort of as a stylistic thing.
It's true. Your vampires don't. What was it? They don't have a sense of present and past.
Don't use past tenses.
How does that work? They just live all of their memories feel like a present moment to them.
I mean, they can't. They can't. I mean, everything is sort of parallel processing. When they call back a memory, they replay it as opposed to.
Oh, that's what it means. Okay, I wasn't sure what it meant. Okay, so
now that said, vampires can use past tense if they want to because they're very smart creatures, right? They just don't tend to do it naturally. And nobody's going to tell them to change because they're vampires.
Yeah. Okay. You see, I never understood that quite exactly. Where I thought maybe it meant they didn't know where in their lives they were as they were experiencing it. But that was like, again, I was trying to make sense of that, but that's not what it was.
Knowing where they are, again, it applies conscious awareness. Vampires are still conscious, but they're not as conscious as we are. Think of dreams.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Where you see yourself doing things. And there's a certain dream logic that isn't really logic at all.
Yeah.
And you are kind of a distant observer of your own dreams, even if you're perceiving it in first person.
Okay.
It's that's the kind of experience I think vampires go through all the time.
And if they're going to do what they do to other sentient beings, it makes sense that that's how they would perceive the world, right?
I'm still playing around with ways of actually showing things from a vampire stream of consciousness. I've been sort of playing around with having like 3 or 4 columns on a single page, each of which contains a different thread of vampire consciousness.
Because in Freestone Revolution, and I haven't figured if there's a pattern, don't tell me yet. If anything, I'll email you. But there's letters, and I think this is why the book was more expensive than its size indicated. But there's letters that are read in the text. Okay, the blurring effect is.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure they're not random, but don't tell me. I'll if anything, when I'm done reading the book, if I haven't figured it out, I'll just send you an email.
Good enough.
If that's okay. If that's okay.
Oh yeah, no, that's not a mistake. That's deliberate.
Don't spoil it for me. Don't spoil it for me.
That's a deliberate hidden message.
I might have to avoid my own comments now. I'm gonna tell you, Bruno. Oh my God, I feel like there's so many things. Of course, I took too much time talking about some other stuff. That's my fault.
Not a problem. It's always nice. It's always nice to go into new territories, right?
It is.
I've never of all the people that I have been on podcasts with and been interviewed by, never talked about MMA before. So
I'm pretty sure it's the last time too, and I'm pretty sure your fans will be like, "Wait, why is that guy wasting time on this?" But the way I handle the show, I guess, is I just talk to people, and I also talk, which is kind of in a way counterproductive to having a guest, but it ensures that conversations I have with people are different from all the other 20 interviews they've had.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, this isn't even like a talk show or an interview. This is just like a couple of guys having beers.
Yeah, exactly. Without the beers, sadly.
Yeah, which kind of sucks, but
it does. Do you still live in Canada, or are
yeah,
you
I'm in Toronto?
US? In Toronto. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll have a beer after a pandemic. Who knows?
Hey, I'm not going anywhere. I'd be happy to.
I'll send an email. Look, I might be over there for that weekend. If
if you are a geek, look up Stormcrow Manor. It's
okay. Are you kidding me?
It's a bar here. Basically, it's like a sports bar for geeks.
Oh my God.
You walk in like it's got a cyberpunk quarter. It's got
no.
It's got a reconstruction of the weird dark forest room from Twin Peaks. It's got all the bathrooms downstairs are set up like nuclear fallout shelters.
Do you know about the bar in Japan that was designed by H.R. Geiger that ended up just being like frequented by Yakuza and then it closed?
I did not know about that. I've only been to Japan.
You have to look that up.
I went to one genre bar that was absolutely awesome, but not this one. I'd never heard of that.
You have to look it up. So the Geiger bar in Japan, just Google it whenever you want. It's a crazy story because it ended up just being this Yakuza joint in the end.
That is so cool. I love the fact that those tough hombres, get off on cool.
Well, in Japan, I think it would just like fit the vibe, right? Like it's okay. I really have
those things. Japan. I mean, their toilets come with AI.
Dude, I wish I didn't have to use paper. It's gross. I wish the toilet just did it.
Yeah. You think it's great now, but you sit on one of those things when the targeting mechanism goes off. And it's got AI that sort of that
targets your butthole.
It targets your asshole, right? But then you get up and it doesn't stop targeting. So it's like shooting at you from across.
You have to be patient. You have to be patient. You have to wait for it to be done.
You have to wait for it to run out of water. Anyhow, yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
I have brought Peter Watts to my show to discuss AI targeting anuses and people biting each other in the nuts. That's what I have accomplished today, and I'm very proud of myself. Everyone, you're welcome. I'm pretty sure this is not like any interviews done before.
And now I'm gonna go and lift weights and become a tough guy.
There you go. It's just lifting weights doesn't make you a tough guy. That was my whole moral of the story earlier.
Well, I run along trails too, so it's and I fight my cats.
I have a complete dad bod now. I'm not in fighting shape. This between the pandemic and I have some kettlebells, but the motivation is hard. At the end, I have a son, and he's almost 2, very energetic, and I just merely maintain a little bit, but I'm just a geek right now.
If we ever do get together, I'll try hitting you in the head with a rock and see what kind of reaction.
Please don't. Please don't.
Okay, go back to your life.
Yes, Peter, thank you so much for coming to the show. And everyone, there'll be links for his stuff in the description down below, which he'll send me an email, I'm sure. And is there anything you wanna tell people where to find you or anything like that? Even though there'll be
if they're interested, it's not that hard. I'm not,
find you.
It's not like I'm underground or anything.
Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet. There you go. Depends how things go in the next few years. Okay, everyone, thanks for watching. Peter, thanks for coming to the show.
Bye.